This Namco X Capcom retrospective was brought to you by my lovely patrons on Patreon. For as little as $3 Australian a month, you can get your name shouted out at the start of every Xenosanctum video, as well as access to bonus behind the scenes content. Also, please consider giving this video a like and sharing it around, as I am trying to grow the channel. Also, if you're not already, please consider subscribing to the channel for more content on Xenoblade, Tales, and more. A question you might ask looking at my taste in games is, how on earth did you get into such strange Japanese titles? From games like Tales to Sakura Wars to God Eater, my library of games contains some pretty random games from some pretty random genres. However, there is one game which ties all these games together, and that is Monolithsoft's Project X Zone series. I first learned about the X Zone series of games shortly after finishing the original Xenoblade and Fire Emblem Awakening. When I heard that Mecha Fiora would be starring alongside Chrom and Lucina in an SRPG crossover called Project X Zone 2, I was interested. Up until that point, my knowledge on Japanese video games was mostly limited to those made by Nintendo. I knew of games like Street Fighter and Tekken, and to a lesser extent Resident Evil, but my knowledge didn't go much further than that. I immediately downloaded the first Project X Zone game in preparation for its upcoming sequel. What I found was a very unique take on the crossover genre. While other crossover games usually go down the route of a fighting game, pitting characters from one series against another, Project X Zone instead sees characters from multiple Japanese IPs team up and work together in a heavily narrative-driven plot. Even before I had finished Project X Zone, I was scouring the net and buying multiple legacy games to try out. From this one game, I soon became a Tales fan, a Sakura Wars fan, and a fan of so many other series. With this game defining my current taste in gaming, it seems only fitting that I look back on this series. However, we won't be starting with Project X Zone, but another crossover game that predates Project X Zone by 7 years. I am of course talking about Namco X Capcom for the PlayStation 2. The idea for a crossover game starring Namco's growing list of semi-iconic characters would originally come from one Soichiro Morizumi. Morizumi had previously worked with Banpresto on their iconic Super Robot Wars series before joining Monolithsoft in the early 2000s. He soon came up with the idea of a crossover game starring multiple Namco IPs in an SRPG mashup that had previously been seen in the Super Robot Wars series. Namco was too interested in such an idea, as 2005 would mark their 50th anniversary as a company, and a title starring their large repertoire of characters looked like a great way to celebrate the anniversary. As a result, Morizumi and Monolithsoft would get to work on a crossover game, with Koji Shitani of Xenosaga fame joining Morizumi as producer. The team would initially craft a roster of around 100 Namco characters consisting of heroes, villains and minions from series such as Tekken, Tales and of course Monolithsoft's own Xenosaga. However, the team felt like a cast of 100 characters wasn't quite big enough for the size of the game they were going for. Thus Namco made the groundbreaking decision to reach out to rival video game company Capcom to use their characters in the game as well. Unlike today, such collaborations between major Japanese studios was close to unheard of. Despite the tradition of rival companies not working together, Capcom would say yes, and with their giant library of characters, Monolithsoft was quickly able to grow the cast size up to over 200 different characters, with newcomers from Street Fighter, Darkstalkers and Mega Man joining the Namco cast. To make this crossover work, Morizumi would develop the original characters of Reggie Araizu and Zayamu to act as the main protagonists of the game, uniting the casts of the Namco and Capcom protagonists to stop the nefarious trans-dimensional organisation UOMA, another original creation by the team. Due to the addition of Capcom characters in the story, as well as other issues, the plot would go through multiple rewrites which would take a major toll on Morizumi, who would face major exhaustion but was luckily backed by a strong team in Monolithsoft to get the game done on time. Namco X Capcom would be announced in January 2005 and released 5 months later on the 26th of May. Despite the high publicity around the game, Namco would not choose to localise the game for NTSC or PAL territories. This was likely due to the game being text heavy, as well as a lot of characters who were completely obscure to Western audiences being in the game. Despite this, only a year later, a fan translation team called Transgen would translate the majority of the game into English and release it in 2008, which is what I'll be playing today. The story begins with a recount of a war fought 10 years ago between two organisations. One sought to create an interdimensional gate called a quake, while the other tried to stop it due to the danger it posed to the world. The latter organisation, called Shinra, was successful in stopping the quake and ending the war, leading to peace. Now in the present day we meet our two protagonists, Reggie Araizu and Zaumu, who are agents of Shinra. The two hear word of a strange phenomenon occurring in downtown Tokyo and are sent to investigate. Upon arriving, the two run into a trio of scythe weasels, a common supernatural foe, and begin combat. Suddenly the two experience a dimensional distortion as gnosis from the Xenosaga universe start appearing in the city, followed by Shion, Momo and Cosmos. Confused as to what exactly is going on, the five decide to hold off introductions and take down the gnosis before they can harm anyone. The fight is soon interrupted by the appearance of three agents from Street Fighter's Shadow Lord's organisation, who have been sent to capture Reggie and Zaumu. Things seem to be getting out of hand when Chun-Li shows up after following the Shadow Law agents. Teaming up with Reggie and the others, the six are able to take down the Gnosis and Shadow Law. With the Shadow Law agents in retreat, Chun-Li abandons the group to chase after them, leaving Reggie and Zaumu to introduce themselves to Shion, Momo and Cosmos. What follows this encounter is a long, and I mean really long, adventure in which Reggie and Zaumu run into different characters from all over different time periods and dimensions as they uncover the world-merging plans of the mysterious organisation Orma and their agent Saya. Unlike so many other Japanese crossover games, like Super Smash Bros. And Marvel vs. Capcom, Namco X Capcom is not a fighting game. Instead, it's a strategy role-playing game in the same vein as Fire Emblem. The game consists of 5 prologue chapters, along with 45 regular chapters. Before a chapter, you'll be given the opportunity to check on your units, as well as buy and equip them with gear and consumable items. You can also enter a training mode to practice the character's combos, as well as save before starting the next chapter. Each chapter will be set in a different location based off an iconic place from one of the many Namco and Capcom titles this game pulls from. Such locations include the Waglingde from Xenosaga, the Third Moon from Strider, and Joliant from Klonoa, just to name a few places. While these locations are rendered in 3D, the character models are displayed as 2D sprites. Such a design choice makes a lot of sense when you factor in that this game has over 200 different characters from a whole slew of series with vastly different art styles. Speaking of the characters, Namco X Capcom's cast is mostly split into playable characters and villains. For the playable characters we have, on the Namco side, Shion, Momo and Cosmos from Xenosaga, Jin, Heihachi, King and Armored King from Tekken, Stan, Ruti and Judas from Tales of Destiny 1 and 2, Valkyrie, Kirino and Sabine from The Legend of Valkyrie, Klonoa and Gantz from Klonoa, Hirishiro and Taki from Soul Calibur, Brother Man and Waihime from Brother Man, Gilgamesh and Kai from the Tower of Draga, Taizo from Dig Dug, Momo from Wonder Momo, Toby from Baraduke, Hiromi from Burning Force, Terasuke from Yokai Dochi, and Taria from Gunpei Tomaden. Meanwhile, on the Capcom side we have Ryu, Ken, Chun-Li, Cammy, Karen, Sakura and Rose from Street Fighter, Dimitri, Morrigan, Hysenko, Felicia and Lilith from Darkstalkers, Mega Man, Roll, Trombone and Surfbot from Mega Man Legends, Captain Commando, Gnu's, Babyhead and Mac from Captain Commando, Unknown Soldiers Player 1 and Player 2 as well as Stilfy from Forgotten Worlds, Hideo and Kyoko from Rival Schools United by Fate, Fong and Bruce from Resident Evil Dead Aim, Guy and Mike from Final Fight, Regina from Dino Crisis, Arthur from Ghosts and Goblins, and Hiryu from Strider. Finally uniting the team together is this game's original protagonists, Reggie and Zaumu. This gives us a total of 60 playable characters. Certain characters will fight as pair units, such as Shion and Momo, while others will fight as solo units, like Cosmos. Meanwhile others, like Chun-Li, will start as a solo unit but later become paired up when other members join the party. Characters will slowly join the party as the game progresses and will get multiple points in the spotlight to drop some fan service to their original series. This comes in multiple forms, from the Soul Calibur cast trying to stop the dimensional distorting effects of the Soul Edge, to the Street Fighter cast trying to stop Shadow Law from expanding their criminal empire across multiple dimensions. Keeping on the topic of story, when I talk about these games with other people, I often refer to them as visual novel cross-strategy games, and that is due to how much dialogue is in the game. With the cast consisting of 60 characters with each getting a decent moment in the spotlight, the game quickly becomes a plethora of text box exchanges between the party and villains they encounter. This unfortunately draws the game's time out and, as we'll see in the gameplay, makes Namco X Capcom one hell of a slog to finish playtime wise. While the fan service is great, it is somewhat limiting to one who is not all too familiar with the games these characters come from. I for one have barely played half the games on this list, and I'm not the only one, as I doubt many Westerners have played games like Forgotten Worlds or Bravo Man. As a result, I missed a lot of the plot details in the story, only truly being able to follow the stories involving games I am very familiar with, such as Xenosaga and Tales of Destiny. Despite this, I was still able to find enjoyment in the story from the few characters I was familiar with. However, the story is only one side of the game, so let's talk about the gameplay. Battles for the most part will see you use a preset selection of characters to take on a couple of villains and their minions in an iconic location from a Namco or Capcom game. All units on the map will be given a turn order based on their current action point level. Action points, or AP, represents the number of actions you can make. An AP gauge is filled by 1 point per turn, and when it hits 10 your characters will be able to move. On your character's turn you will have several options. Move, which will allow you to reposition your character at the cost of 1 AP. Attack, which will begin combat with a selected opponent in range at the cost of 3 AP. Skill, which will allow you to use character-specific skills to give you benefits at the cost of this character's magic points. Item, which will allow your characters to use any equipped consumable item. Status, which will allow you to check on your character's stats. Info, which will allow you to check on things like the victory condition. Wait, in which your characters will end their turn at the cost of 1 AP, if no attack was made. And finally, Kill. This option only shows up when you're next to a treasure chest and will see your character plunder it for items. Characters will be able at most to perform 1 move and 1 attack per turn, along with as many skills and items as they can afford. When an attack option and an opponent is selected, your character and the selected enemy will go into the battle screen, where Namco X Capcom's combat gets interesting. Unlike other SRPGs, which combat will be conducted automatically, battles are instead conducted as a series of circle inputs combined with directional inputs on the D-pad. These inputs correspond to the different tech attacks the characters can perform. Tech attacks all have different stats and hitboxes that work better on certain enemies over others. Techs will also improve as the characters level up, resulting in more powerful techs that do more damage. Characters will initially begin combat with an automated initial attack. Following the initial attack, it will be up to you to attack the enemy with your different techs. Ideally, you want your attacks to continually knock the enemy around and keep the enemy in the air, as this will net you benefits. Thus, battles are a big game of timing your attacks so that they hit the enemy at the right time for the largest amount of damage possible. This can be quite challenging, as different techs have different delay times and will launch the enemy in different ways. Your characters can perform up to their branch number in attacks before combat ends. However, if you're lucky, characters can gain additional branch numbers, as well as other bonuses by timing your attacks just right. They can also build up damage multipliers as well as gain usable items. If during combat the character uses all 5 of their different tech attacks, they'll be rewarded by a small regeneration of health or magic points. This somewhat incentivizes characters to use all their attacks as opposed to the one that does the most damage. If you are successful in defeating an enemy, you'll be rewarded with additional experience as well as 1 AP regeneration. Along with regaining magic points and health points, as characters attack they will also build up an SP gauge. When the gauge reaches 100, the characters will unlock the ability to perform a death blow with triangle. Death blows are powerful super attacks that can do a lot of damage and really help in taking down some of the game's more tougher enemies. Along with death blows, your characters can also do multiple attacks. These attacks will often require 2 specific units to be in close proximity to each other to perform, but often can be used against 2 or 3 enemies at once. Multiple assault attacks will cost 50 magic points from each character involved in the attack. Unlike normal attacks, multiple assault attacks play out automatically without any button inputs. Unfortunately, they aren't super useful in the game, as for the most part I can often do more damage using regular attacks, and I often only really use these attacks to help mop up a cluster of enemies on low HP. Much like how you will be able to take actions when your character reaches 10 AP, so too will the enemy. The enemy AI is not particularly smart in this game, often going for the closest unit, ignoring other units on low HP, thus it's pretty easy to outplay the AI. You can also outplay the AI in battle. When attacked by an enemy, your character can choose to take several different actions. First, they can use items and skills right before the fight. They can then choose whether or not to defend at the cost of 1 AP, thus risking more damage for a quicker start to the next turn. You can also call in an ally standing next to the character being attacked and have them take the attack instead. Once a fight starts, you can reduce the damage you take even more by mimicking the enemy attack inputs on the D-pad. By perfectly mimicking the enemy attacks on the D-pad, you can regain up to 2 AP, thus bringing the character's turn forwards. It can also lead to your Vanguard party members getting a whole bunch of extra turns simply by being attacked a lot. While you can choose to tank the enemy attacks, you can also choose to evade them at the cost of 1 AP and 10 SP. This will result in no battle screen and instead see your character take a small bit of damage. Along with the evasion, characters will also be able to unlock special counter skills that result in your character avoiding the enemy attack entirely and hitting back with their own attack. Be warned though that the enemy can do such attacks as well when their SP reaches 100. If AP, HP, MP and SP gauges weren't enough for you, you also need to watch out for your break gauge. This red bar slowly fills up when you're attacked, and if it's filled to 100, it will put your characters in a broken status. In a broken status, you'll no longer be able to take any action, and will not be able to respond to enemy attacks. This status will last 3 of your character's turns unless they get attacked, in which case it will be reset to 0 following combat if they're not killed. Unlike Fire Emblem, death doesn't hold a huge punishment for your characters other than leaving you down on firepower for the rest of the fight. Characters will return in the next stage unless they're part of the stage victory condition, in which case you'll get a game over and need to restart the chapter. Or you could just load your mid-battle save. Much like with most other crossover games, Namco X Capcom's soundtrack consists mostly of tracks from the multiple represented games, like Ryu's stage theme and Leon and Irony of Fate. Most of these tunes will play over their respective characters when it's their turn in battle, which is a neat touch that I like. While some of these tracks, like Strider's theme, have been modernised from their original chiptunes, others, like Xenosaga's battle theme, sound as if they've been ripped straight from the original game. Due to all the different compositions in this game, it's difficult to credit one specific musician to the game's soundtrack. Yuzo Koshio will usually come up as the main composer of this game, as he was responsible for the opening and ending songs, as well as the themes for the game's original characters. Koshiro makes very strong use of synthesizer in his soundtrack, and does a somewhat decent job of not having his music stick out from the plethora of cameo tunes. While the original tracks are nothing incredible, I still ended up getting them stuck in my head due to how often they play. Despite the game taking music from over 25 different franchises, the game's soundtrack is somewhat small, and you often hear the same pieces over and over again, with multiple characters sharing the same theme. Much like with the Tales games I have covered previously, Namco X Capcom features an anime intro done by Production IG. The opening song, Subarashiki Shin Senkai, or Brave New World in English, will be written by Koshiho and sung by the singer Flare, who I for the love of me cannot find any information on. The song is pretty catchy, even if I don't think too highly of it. As for the introduction animation by Production IG, I definitely find it one of their stranger works. For starts, they seem to like the use of flashing dots in the intro. Scenes also often move too quickly to get a good idea of what's happening, and can often lead to the opening feeling chaotic. To sum up, I might prefer Production IG's work on the Tales openings. I think we'll see better opening animations in the later Project Cross Zone games. Namco X Capcom is definitely a unique game, both in the wider gaming world and its own series. Going down the route of a strategy game as opposed to a fighting game was a really interesting idea that makes this game stand out compared to the plethora of crossover fighting games. However, how does this stack up with other strategy games? In my opinion, pretty well. While nowhere near as strategy focused as a Fire Emblem game, Namco X Capcom still delivers a decent challenge as you try to move your units around the map in the most efficient way possible, especially if you want all those treasure chests. I've also frequently come close to a game over, as powerful bosses frequently threaten to mow down my entire party. While the game does a solid job as a strategy game, I do take issues with several of its decisions. The AP system can be quite annoying, especially when that unit you really want to move can't until you've moved 10 other units around in the middle of nowhere. The units can also feel a bit unbalanced. While I did somewhat favour using the characters I am familiar with, I became a little suspicious of how powerful Cosmos was becoming, with her soon being able to deal twice as much damage as most other party members, helped partially by being one of the only characters with an attack buff and a defense lowering skill. Did Monolithsoft purposely make their own character more powerful than the rest of the cast? I don't know. Meanwhile, I mentioned it a bit in this review, but I also need to stress again here how long this game takes to finish. If we again compare this game to a Fire Emblem game, we have the latter, which usually consists of 20 to 30 chapters, with each taking around 30 to 40 minutes to complete. Meanwhile, we have this game which has 50 chapters, of which most can take over an hour and a half to finish. This is in part driven by the AP system and certain enemies with extremely long attack animations, but is also simply due to the large amount of dialogue in this game. While a dialogue heavy game is not necessarily a bad thing, Namco X Capcom can frequently get very repetitive in its plot. The amount of time a stage centres around the Soul Wedge or the party splits up into 3 groups can get old really fast. Also, take a drink every time someone in the party expresses how easy the battle was going, only for another to exclaim how they sense heat signatures approaching, followed by 10 new enemy troops showing up along with a boss unit, and then take another drink if that boss is Saya and her Orma minions, who show up in what feels like every second stage. It's for this very reason why I likely won't be playing this game ever again, as it took way too much of my time to finish, and I really want to work on retrospectives for other games. While my opinions on this game might seem a bit harsh, I still enjoyed playing this game, as well as learning more about the games these obscure characters come from. Take Bravo Man for instance. Did you know that this old obscure arcade game was brought back in 2012 as a mobile game along with an anime that's easily available on YouTube and is hilarious? I didn't know either until I played this game and wanted to know more about where these characters come from, and that's the best part about playing these games, learning about these obscure Japanese video games these characters come from. Namco X Capcom set out to be a multi-game crossover event, and it truly did succeed. Now that I've finally finished Namco X Capcom, you think I would move on to the Project Cross Zone games, but first we need to head to the DS to look at another game which, while not officially part of the Project Cross Zone series, is very much a key entry in the history of these games. So come back next time as we look back on Super Robot Wars OG Saga: Endless Frontier.